The elevator doors were closing when I slipped through, and I was already crying. Not the kind of crying you can hide, the quiet tears that slide down without sound or expression. This was the other kind. The gasping, shaking, can't catch your breath kind that happens when you've been holding everything together for so long that when it finally breaks, it breaks completely. I had just come from the stairwell on the 48th floor, where Derek had cornered me between the fire extinguisher and the emergency exit, his hand around my throat, his voice in my ear telling me all the things he was going to do when he caught me alone. He had found me. After 6 months of hiding, of changing my name on the work roster, of taking different routes home every night, he had found me. And I had run, because running was all I knew how to do, and now I was in an elevator with mascara streaking down my face and my uniform torn at the collar and absolutely no idea what came next. I didn't see him at first. The lights were dim, that expensive amber glow that made everything look like old photographs, and I was too busy trying to breathe to notice anything else. I pressed the button for the lobby with shaking fingers and leaned against the wall, my hand going to my throat where I could still feel the ghost of Derek's grip. It was going to bruise. It always bruised. And I was going to have to explain it to someone, my supervisor, or the security guard, or the emergency room doctor. And they were going to ask the same questions they always asked. And I was going to tell the same lies I always told. And nothing was going to change. That's when I noticed him. Standing in the corner like a shadow given form, perfectly still, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. He was tall, older than me by at least 15 years, wearing a suit that cost more than my annual rent. His face was carved from something harder than bone, and he was looking at my throat, at the red marks that were already darkening, at the torn collar of my uniform, at the tears still sliding down my cheeks. I should have been afraid. A woman alone in an elevator with a strange man, already hurt, already vulnerable. This was the beginning of every horror story I had ever heard. But I was too exhausted for fear. I was too broken for self-preservation. I just looked back at him with eyes that had nothing left to hide and waited for whatever was going to happen next. The elevator descended 2 floors before the lights flickered. I felt it in my stomach first, that sickening lurch of machinery giving up. And then we stopped. Just stopped. Suspended somewhere between the 47th floor and the 45th, the digital display blinking once before going dark entirely. Emergency lighting kicked in, red and harsh, turning everything the colour of warning signs. The universe apparently had a sense of humour. I laughed. I couldn't help it. It came out broken and wrong, more sob than sound, but it was still a laugh. "Of course," I said to no one. "Of course this is happening." The man in the corner still hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. The emergency phone was dead. I checked, pressing the button 3 times, listening to nothing. The storm outside was screaming against the building, wind and rain hammering at glass somewhere far above us. We were trapped. For how long I didn't know. But we were trapped, and I was still crying, and he was still watching me with those dark, unreadable eyes. "The backup generator should engage within 15 minutes, he said. His voice was lower than I expected, quieter. It didn't echo the way voices usually did in small spaces. It absorbed into the walls like it belonged there. "If it doesn't, we'll be here until the storm passes." "Okay." I wiped my face with the back of my hand, which only smeared the mascara further. "Okay." I thought about the 47th floor boardroom, the one I had just finished cleaning before Derek appeared. Every Tuesday and Thursday after the executive dinners, I was the one who scrubbed the floors on my hands and knees, who polished the brass fixtures until they gleamed, who crawled under the massive conference table to clean the underside because I had noticed once that dust collected there and no one else ever thought to check. It was a strange thing to think about while trapped in an elevator with a stranger, but my mind was grasping for anything normal, anything routine, Anything that wasn't the feeling of Derek's hand on my throat or the sound of his voice promising to find me wherever I ran. 15 minutes passed. The backup generator did not engage. The building groaned and swayed in the wind, and I realized with a slow, settling certainty that we might actually be here until morning. I was still shaking, still crying, though the tears had slowed to something more manageable. My throat was throbbing where Derek had grabbed me, and I kept touching it without meaning. Too, pressing my fingers against the bruises like I could somehow make them disappear. Who did that to you? The question came without preamble, direct, unavoidable. I looked up to find him watching my hand, watching the way my fingers kept going to my throat. No one. The lie was automatic, practiced. I fell. No. His voice was patient but firm. You didn't. I didn't know what to say to that. In my experience, men accepted lies. They wanted to accept them. It was easier than dealing with the truth, easier than getting involved, easier than caring about a woman they didn't know. But this man was looking at me like my lie had simply bounced off him, like he was still waiting for the real answer underneath. It doesn't matter, I said. It matters. He took a step toward me, then stopped when I flinched. He held up his hands, palms out, showing me he meant no harm. I'm not going to hurt you. I need you to know that. Everyone says that. I know. He lowered himself to the floor, slowly, deliberately, until he was sitting against the opposite wall. It put him below my eye level, made him smaller, less threatening. I had never seen a man do that before, consciously reduce himself to make a woman feel safer. I know everyone says that, but I'm not everyone. I didn't believe him. I couldn't afford to believe him. But I also couldn't stand anymore. My legs were shaking too badly, so I slid down the wall until I was sitting too. My knees pulled up to my chest, my arms wrapped around them. We faced each other across the small space, our legs almost touching in the middle, the red light pulsing between us like a heartbeat. My name is Marcus, he said. What's yours? Elena. Elena. He repeated it like he was memorizing it, filing it away somewhere important. That's a beautiful name. Thank you. The words felt strange in my mouth, formal and wrong. I should stop crying. I'm sorry, this is unprofessional. You don't need to apologize. He was watching me with something that might have been concern, or might have been calculation. I couldn't tell. You don't need to stop crying either. It seems like you have reason to cry. I laughed again, that same broken sound. I have plenty of reasons. Tell me one. I looked at him, really looked for the first time since I had noticed him in the corner. His face was hard, all sharp edges and shadows, but his eyes were patient, waiting, not demanding, not pushing, just waiting. Like he had all the time in the world, like we weren't trapped in a broken elevator in the middle of a storm, suspended between floors with no one coming to help us. Why do you want to know? Because we're going to be here for a while. He glanced at the dark emergency phone, the dead display panel. And because you're hurt, and you're scared, and you're alone, and I'd rather talk than sit in silence watching you suffer. I should have shut him out. I should have turned away, closed my eyes, waited for morning in protective silence. That's what I had always done. That's what had kept me alive this long. The walls I built, the doors I locked, the parts of myself I kept hidden from everyone. But something about this night, this storm, this man with his patient eyes and his unexpected gentleness, made me feel like those walls were already crumbling, like I had nothing left to protect. His name is Derek, I said. My ex. He found me tonight. In the stairwell. Marcus didn't react, didn't gasp or grimace or look away. He just nodded once, slowly, and waited for more. I left him 8 months ago. He put me in the hospital twice before that. The first time he said it was an accident, and I believed him because I wanted to believe him. The second time I knew it wasn't, but I stayed anyway because I didn't have anywhere else to go. I paused, tasting the words in my mouth. I had never said them out loud before. Not to anyone. He broke 3 of my ribs. I told the doctors I fell down the stairs. And they believed you? Doctors believe what's easiest to believe. They don't want to get involved. They don't want to call the police or fill out reports or make things complicated. I shrugged. Everyone wants things to be simple. What happened after the hospital? I told him. I don't know why. Maybe because he asked. Maybe because the red light and the storm and the strange suspended feeling of being trapped made everything feel unreal, like I was telling a story about someone else. I told him about going back to Derek because I had no money and no family and nowhere else to go. I told him about the months of walking on eggshells, of learning to read his moods, of making myself smaller and quieter and more invisible until I barely existed at all. I told him about the night I finally ran, a Tuesday in February after he had thrown a plate at my head, and it had shattered against the wall so close I had felt the shards in my hair, had walked out with nothing but my coat and my wallet, and I had never gone back. How did you end up here? He asked. In this building. I got a job with the cleaning company. Night shift. It was the only work I could find that didn't require references or a stable address. I looked down at my ruined uniform, the torn collar, the bleach stain on the knee that I had never been able to afford to replace. I've been here 3 years. I thought I was safe. I thought he had given up. But he found you. He always finds me. My voice broke on the words. That's what he does. He waits, and he watches, and he finds me, no matter how careful I am, no matter how invisible I try to be. He told me once that I belonged to him, that I would always belong to him, that he would never stop looking. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. The red light pulsed between us, steady as a heartbeat, and I could hear the storm howling outside, the wind throwing itself against the building like it was trying to tear it apart. Then he said, "Tell me more. More about Derek. More about everything. How you got here. Who you are. What made you the person sitting in front of me right now?" I stared at him. Why? Why do you care? Because I want to understand. He leaned his head back against the wall, his eyes never leaving my face. Because you're interesting. Because you're surviving something that would have broken most people, and I want to know how. Because we have hours ahead of us, and I'd rather spend them learning about you than watching you suffer in silence. No one had ever said anything like that to me before. No one had ever looked at my survival and seen something worth understanding. To everyone else, I was a cautionary tale at best, the woman who stayed too long, who didn't leave soon enough, who made the wrong choices and paid for them. But this man was looking at me like I was something else entirely. Like I was a puzzle he wanted to solve, like I was worth his time. So I told him everything. I told him about my childhood, about my mother who had died when I was 8, leaving me with nothing but a faded photograph and a name I barely remembered. About my mother's boyfriend, who had taken custody because there was no one else, and who had taught me what it meant to be invisible. How he had hit me when I made noise, how he had locked me in closets when I cried, how I had learned year by year to make myself smaller and smaller until I barely took up any space at all. There was a closet under the stairs, I said, and my voice sounded distant even to my own ears, like it was coming from somewhere far away. He would put me there when he was drinking, sometimes for hours, sometimes overnight. I learned to be so quiet that he would forget I was there. I learned to breathe without making a sound. I learned to disappear. Marcus listened without interrupting. His face was unreadable in the red light, but his eyes never left mine, and I could feel the weight of his attention like a physical thing. I told him about the foster homes that came after, the ones that were okay, and the ones that weren't. The family that had seemed kind until the father started coming into my room at night, until I learned to barricade my door with a chair and sleep with a kitchen knife under my pillow. I told him about that too. The footsteps in the hallway, the way the doorknob would turn slowly in the darkness, the terror of lying perfectly still and praying the chair would hold. I told him about the social worker who had finally believed me, who had moved me to a new placement, who had looked at me with pity that felt worse than the fear. I told him about the emergency placement that had put me with 3 other girls and a woman who spent the food money on lottery tickets and left us to fend for ourselves. How we had learned to steal food from the corner store. How we had taken turns keeping watch. How we had formed a bond, born of shared survival that I had never experienced before or since. I told him about the group home where I had turned 16 and aged out of the system with nothing but a garbage bag full of clothes and a high school diploma I had earned despite everything. I taught myself to be useful, I said. That was the key to surviving. If you were useful, people kept you around. If you were useful, they didn't throw you away. So I learned to clean and cook and organize and anticipate what people needed before they knew they needed it. I learned to make myself indispensable without being visible. It's a delicate balance. You have to be present enough to be valuable, but invisible enough that no one notices you're there. That sounds exhausting, Marcus said quietly. It is. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. It's the most exhausting thing in the world, but it's also the only reason I'm still alive. I told him about the years after aging out of foster care, the minimum wage, jobs, the shared apartments with strangers who stole my things and ate my food, the men who offered help but always wanted something in return. I told him about learning to survive in a world that didn't care if I survived, about building skills and hiding scars, about becoming so good at invisibility that sometimes I forgot I existed at all. I told him about meeting Derek, how he had seemed different at first, how he had made me feel seen for the first time in my life. How that seeing had turned into watching, then possessing, then controlling. How the first time he hit me, I had been so shocked that I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even cry. How I had stayed because I didn't know how to leave, because I had convinced myself that being loved badly was better than not being loved at all. The worst part, I said, wasn't the hitting. It was the way he made me feel like I deserved it. Like everything that happened was my fault, like if I could just be better, quieter, more perfect, he would stop. I spent years trying to be good enough. I never was. The hours passed. The storm raged outside. And I talked and talked and talked, emptying myself of stories I had never told anyone, truths I had buried so deep I had almost forgotten they existed. I told him about the scars on my body, the ones you could see and the ones you couldn't. I told him about the nightmares that still woke me up screaming, the way I flinched when men raised their voices, the constant low-level fear that hummed in my blood like electricity. I told him about the photograph I kept in my wallet, the one of my mother, and how sometimes I talked to her in the dark when I was alone. Marcus listened to all of it without interrupting, without judging, without trying to fix me or comfort me or offer solutions. He just listened, those dark, patient eyes never leaving my face, and something in me cracked open wider with every word. "I've never told anyone any of this," I said at some point. The tears had stopped. My voice was raw. "I don't know why I'm telling you." "Because you need to." His voice was quiet. "Because you've been carrying it alone for too long. Because sometimes strangers are safer than friends. We have no expectations to disappoint, no relationships to risk. You could be anyone." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You could be worse than Derek. I don't know anything about you." "That's true." He tilted his head, considering. "Would you like to?" "Would I like to what?" "Know about me. Who I am. What I've done." He paused. "I could tell you. It seems only fair since you've told me everything." I thought about it. Part of me wanted to know, the part that had been trained to assess threats, to gather information, to understand the dangers around me. But another part of me, a smaller and more surprising part, didn't care. He had listened to my worst stories without flinching. He had sat on a dirty elevator floor for hours, patient and present, never making me feel like a burden or a problem to be solved. Did it matter who he was outside of this room? Tell me one thing, I said. One thing that matters. He was quiet for a long moment. The red light pulsed between us, and I could hear the storm beginning to quiet outside, the wind settling from a scream to a moan. Then he said, "I own this building." I blinked. "You, what?" "This building, the one we're in. I own it." He gestured vaguely at the walls around us. "I own several buildings in the city. I have business interests in real estate, finance, and other areas that are more difficult to define. I am very wealthy. I am very powerful. And I am very used to people being afraid of me." I processed this slowly. The suit that cost more than my rent, the calm authority in his voice, the way he had seemed to own the space even in a broken elevator. Are you dangerous?" "Yes," he said it simply, without pride or shame. "I've done things that would horrify you. My family has a reputation that goes back 3 generations, and it's not a reputation for kindness. Men like Derek, who owe money to people like me, sometimes disappear. I tell you this because you've been honest with me, and you deserve honesty in return." I should have been terrified. I should have pressed myself against the wall, should have started calculating escape routes, should have felt the familiar cold dread of realizing I was trapped with someone capable of hurting me, but I didn't. I looked at this man who had just admitted to being a monster, and I felt nothing. No fear, no judgment, just a strange, tired recognition. "You're in the Mafia," I said. "Or something like it." Something like it. The word is old-fashioned. The reality is more complicated. "And you're telling me this because by morning, I'm going to know everything about you." He met my eyes, steady and direct. "It seems only fair that you know everything about me too. You've trusted me with your worst secrets. Here are mine." He told me. He told me about his father, who had built an empire on fear and violence, and died leaving Marcus to inherit it at 23. He told me about the funeral, how half the city had come to pay their respects, and how he had known that most of them were there to assess him, to determine whether the son would be as dangerous as the father, whether there was weakness they could exploit. I was terrified, he admitted. I was 23 years old, and I was suddenly responsible for an empire I had never asked for. People were watching me, waiting for me to fail. And I knew that if I showed weakness, even for a moment, they would tear me apart. He told me about the choices he had made since then. Some that he regretted, many that he didn't. He told me about the people who had tried to kill him, the people he had destroyed in return, the constant calculation of power and loyalty that defined his existence. He told me about the loneliness of being surrounded by people who were afraid of him, the exhaustion of never being able to trust, the way he had learned to read rooms and assess threats the same way I had, survival instincts honed by a childhood that had taught him people were dangerous. "My father wasn't physically violent," he said. "Not usually. He was more subtle than that. He knew how to wound you with words, with silence, with the withdrawal of approval. I spent my entire childhood trying to earn something he was never going to give me. By the time I realized that, it was too late. I had already become what he wanted me to be." "We're not so different," I said slowly. "You learned to survive by being so powerful that no one would dare touch you. I learned to survive by being so invisible that no one would notice I was there. Different strategies. Same goal. The difference is, you chose your life," he said. "I didn't choose mine, didn't I?" I shook my head. "I was born into nothing, raised in nothing. By the time I was old enough to make choices, the choices had already been made for me. The only thing I could control was how I survived." "And how do you survive?" I thought about it. "Carefully," I said finally. quietly. I try not to take up space. I try not to need things because needing things gets you hurt. I try to be useful without being noticed. I try to anticipate what people want before they know they want it. I paused. I polished the underside of conference tables because I noticed once that dust collects there and no one else thinks to check. It's not about being clean. It's about being thorough. It's about doing the job so well that no one can ever accuse you of being lazy or careless or expendable. I know, he said. I looked at him sharply. You know what? I know you polish the underside of conference tables. I know you clean the 47th floor boardroom every Tuesday and Thursday after the executive dinners. I know. You're the only member of the cleaning staff who has never missed a shift in 3 years, who has never called in sick, who has never left early or arrived late. He paused. I pay attention to the people who work in my buildings. Most of them are invisible to me. You weren't. Something shifted in my chest. Something that might have been fear, or might have been something else entirely. Why wasn't I invisible to you? Because you do things that no one else notices need to be done. Because you work like someone who has something to prove. Because I saw you once at 3 a.m, scrubbing a stain out of a carpet in an office that no one uses anymore, and I wondered what kind of person puts that much effort into something no one will ever see. He smiled, and it was a sad smile. I recognized something in you. The same thing I saw in myself. The need to be perfect, because being anything less means being worthless. The storm was quieting outside. I could hear it in the change of the wind, the way the rain had softened from hammers to fingertips against the glass. Dawn was coming. I could feel it in my bones, the weight of a whole night passed in confession and revelation. What happens when we get out of here? I asked. That depends on you. Marcus looked at me with those dark, patient eyes. I know everything about you now, your history, your pain, your current danger. I know about Derek. I know he found you tonight, that he'll find you again, that you have no protection and no resources and no way to make him stop. I know all of that too. I've known it for years. The difference is that now I know it. He leaned forward slightly. And I can do something about it, if you'll let me. What would you do? Make him disappear. He said it calmly, matter-of-factly, like he was discussing the weather. Not kill him. That would be messy and unnecessary. But I have resources. I can find out things about people, things they'd rather keep, hidden. I can apply pressure in ways that don't leave marks. I can make it very clear to Derek that you are no longer someone he can touch, and that trying will have consequences he can't imagine. Why would you do that for me? Because I've spent a night listening to you describe a life of survival and suffering, and I recognize something in it. He paused. Because you polished the underside of conference tables. Because you survived things that would have broken most people. Because you trusted me with your truth, and I want to do something worthy of that trust. I stared at him. The red emergency light was still pulsing, but it seemed softer now, less like warning and more like a heartbeat. This man, this dangerous, powerful, complicated man, was offering to solve my biggest problem. The problem that had haunted me for years. The problem I had resigned myself to carrying alone until it eventually killed me. I can't owe you something like that, I said. I can't be in debt to someone like you. It's not a debt. He shook his head slowly. I don't want anything from you, Elena. Not gratitude, not loyalty, not anything else. I just want to do this. For you. Because I can. Because someone should have done it a long time ago. The elevator hummed, the lights flickered, then steadied, and the display panel blinked back to life. We were moving. The power had returned, and we were descending, and the night was over. Marcus stood first, offering me his hand. I took it, letting him pull me to my feet. His grip was strong and warm, and he released me immediately, giving me space. Always giving me space. My card. He pulled a plain white rectangle from his pocket. Just a name. Marcus Volkov. and a phone number. When Derek bothers you again, and he will, before I can stop him, call me. Anytime, day or night. I will answer. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors slid open to reveal marble floors and brass fixtures and a security guard staring at us with barely concealed shock. I stepped out on shaky legs, still clutching the card. "Thank you," I said, "for listening. Thank you for trusting me." He didn't follow me out. He stood in the elevator doorway, one hand holding the doors open, his dark eyes fixed on my face. "I meant what I said, Elena. About Derek. About all of it. By morning I knew everything about you, and I'm going to use that knowledge to keep you safe." The doors closed between us. I stood in the lobby of a building I had cleaned for 3 years, holding a business card that felt heavier than it should, and I realized that everything had changed. I didn't understand how yet. I didn't know what it meant, but I could feel it. Something fundamental had shifted, some door had opened that couldn't be closed again. I went home. I walked through streets still wet with rain, past buildings still dark from the power outages, and I let myself into my apartment with its 3 locks and its window that didn't quite close. I sat on my bed and stared at the wall and tried to process what had just happened. A whole night of telling my secrets to a stranger, a dangerous man who wanted to protect me, a promise that felt too big to believe. I should have dismissed it. I should have filed the card away and forgotten about it, should have assumed he was like every other man who had ever promised to help, full of words and empty of action. But I couldn't stop thinking about his eyes, the patience in them, the recognition, the way he had said we're not so different, like he meant it, like he understood something about survival that other people didn't. 3 days later, Derek found me again. He was waiting outside my apartment building when I came home from work, sitting on the steps like he owned them, that fake smile on his face, that calculating look in his eyes. My whole body went cold when I saw him. The old familiar dread, the urge to run, the knowledge that running wouldn't help. "Elena!" He stood up as I approached. "We need to talk." I didn't respond. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the card. I had been carrying it with me everywhere, like a talisman, like a prayer, and I dialed the number with shaking fingers. Elena. Marcus's voice was calm, immediate, like he had been waiting for the call. "What's happening?" "He's here. At my apartment. Derek moved fast. He grabbed my wrist, squeezing the bruises he had left 3 days ago, and yanked the phone out of my hand. "Who is this? Who are you calling?" I heard Marcus's voice on the line, faint but clear. "I'm on my way. Keep him talking." Derek stared at the phone, then at me. His face twisted with the anger I knew so well, the anger that had put me in the hospital twice, the anger that had taught me to flinch at sudden movements and sleep with one eye open. "You called someone? You think someone's going to help you?" "No one helps you, Elena. No one cares about you. You're mine." "I'm not yours." The words came out stronger than I expected. "I was never yours." He raised his hand. I saw it coming, the way I always saw it coming, and I braced myself for the impact. But before his hand could connect, a car pulled up to the curb. Black sedan, tinted windows, moving fast. The door opened before it had fully stopped, and Marcus stepped out like a storm given human form. Derek froze. His hand dropped. He looked at Marcus, taking in the suit, the presence, the cold authority that radiated off him like heat from a fire. And something shifted in his expression. Fear. Real fear. Maybe for the first time in his life. "Who the hell are you?" Marcus didn't answer. He walked toward us slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving Derek's face. When he reached us, he stopped between me and the man who had hurt me, and the air seemed to change temperature. The streetlight flickered above us. The night went quiet. "You're going to let go of her arm," Marcus said. His voice was quiet, almost conversational. "And then you're going to walk away. And then you're going to forget you ever knew her name." Derek laughed, but it was a nervous sound, thin and unconvincing. Look, I don't know who you are, but this is between me and... It's not between anyone. Marcus took another step forward. You lost any claim to her the first time you raised your hand. Now you have a choice. Walk away tonight, disappear from this city, forget she exists, or stay and learn what happens to men who hurt people under my protection. Your protection? Derek's voice cracked. Who do you think you... I think I'm someone who knows about the money you owe the Castellano family. I think I'm someone who knows about the deal you made to avoid paying it back. I think I'm someone who could make one phone call and have you buried in a shallow grave by sunrise. Marcus smiled, and it was the coldest thing I had ever seen. The smile of a man who had done terrible things and would do them again without hesitation. I think I'm someone you don't want as an enemy. Am I wrong? Derek's face went white. The hand gripping my wrist loosened, then dropped entirely. He took a step back, then another, and I watched the bravado drain out of him like water from a broken glass. This isn't over, he said, but his voice had no conviction. Yes, it is. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You have 24 hours to leave the city. If I find out you're still here, if I find out you've tried to contact her, if I even hear that you've spoken her name, I will end you, not as a threat, as a promise. Derek ran. He actually ran, sprinting down the sidewalk like something was chasing him, his footsteps fading into the distance until there was nothing left but silence. Marcus watched him go without moving, and I stood behind him, shaking, unable to believe what had just happened. Are you all right? He turned to face me, and his expression softened into something almost gentle. Did he hurt you? No. I mean, not tonight. I'm fine. I looked down at my wrist, at the fresh bruises layered over the old ones. Thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't... You don't need to thank me. He reached out, hesitated, then carefully took my hand and examined my wrist in the streetlight. His touch was so gentle I almost couldn't feel it. You called me. That's the first step. The first step toward what? He looked up at me, those dark eyes holding something I couldn't name. Toward believing you deserve protection, toward letting someone help you, toward understanding that you don't have to survive alone anymore. I started to cry. I didn't mean to. I had cried so much in the elevator that I thought I had no tears left. But they came anyway, sliding down my face in the cold night air. Marcus didn't try to hold me or comfort me. He just stood there, patient as always, letting me feel whatever I needed to feel. I don't know how to do this, I said through the tears. I don't know how to need someone. I don't know how to trust anyone. I've been alone so long that I don't remember what it feels like not to be. I know. His voice was gentle. I know you don't know, but you could learn, if you wanted to. What if I can't? Then you try anyway. He released my wrist carefully like he was setting down something fragile. And I'll be here, waiting, for as long as it takes. I didn't understand him. I didn't understand any of this. Why a man like him would care about a woman like me. Why he would spend a night in an elevator listening to my stories. Why he would appear like a guardian angel when I needed him most. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. And maybe that was enough. The weeks that followed were strange and slow and unlike anything I had ever experienced. Derek disappeared. I heard through a mutual friend that he had moved to California, though no one knew why. His apartment was empty. His phone was disconnected. It was like he had never existed, erased from my life with surgical precision. And Marcus was there. Not constantly, not overwhelmingly, but present in ways that made a difference. He texted every few days, simple messages that asked how I was doing and expected nothing in return. He sent a car to pick me up when I worked late, so I didn't have to take the subway alone. He had someone fix the window in my apartment that didn't close all the way, though I never saw them do it. I just came home one day and it was sealed tight. He was protecting me without possessing me. It was so different from anything I had experienced before that I didn't know how to process it. Every act of care I had ever received had come with strings, expectations, debts, demands. But Marcus asked for nothing. He just gave, quietly and consistently, and waited to see if I would let him give more. I saw him in person for the first time since that night 3 weeks later. He appeared at my apartment building, the same black sedan parked at the curb, and he asked if I would have dinner with him. Not as a transaction, he said. Not as a favor or a debt. Just two people sharing a meal. I said yes. The restaurant was quiet and expensive, and I felt completely out of place in my nicest dress, which I had bought second-hand 3 years ago, and which was starting to fray at the hem. The other diners looked like they belonged in a magazine, all sharp suits and glittering jewellery, and the casual confidence of people who had never worried about money. I sat across from Marcus and tried not to touch the silverware wrong, tried not to draw attention to myself, tried to be invisible the way I had always been invisible. But Marcus looked at me like I belonged there, like I belonged anywhere I wanted to be. "Tell me something new," he said after we ordered. "Something I don't know about you. You already know everything." I smiled and it felt strange on my face. I hadn't smiled in so long. "I told you my whole life story in that elevator. You told me your past. I want to know your future." He leaned forward slightly. "What do you want, Elena? Not what you're running from. What you're running toward." I thought about it. Really thought. For the first time in years. What did I want? Beyond survival, beyond safety, beyond the simple absence of pain? "I wanted to be a nurse once," I said. Before everything. Before Derek, before the foster homes, before I learned to stop wanting things. I liked the idea of taking care of people, of helping them get better. "Why did you stop wanting it?" "Because wanting things got me hurt." I looked down at my hands, at the calluses from years of scrubbing floors. Every time I reached for something, someone took it away or used it against me. It was safer not to want. And now? I paused. Now I'm starting to think maybe I was wrong. Maybe wanting things isn't the problem. Maybe I was just wanting from the wrong people. He smiled at me then. A real smile, warm and genuine, and something shifted in my chest. Something that felt like hope. We had dinner again the following week. And the week after that, it became a rhythm, a pattern, something I could count on. Every Thursday at 7, the black sedan would pull up to my building, and I would climb in, and we would go somewhere quiet and talk for hours about everything and nothing. He told me about his work, the parts he could share, the real estate deals and the financial negotiations, and the constant chess game of power and influence. He told me about the people who worked for him, the ones he trusted and the ones he didn't. He told me about his mother, who had died when he was young, and how he still visited her grave every month, rain or shine, because she was the only person who had ever loved him without wanting anything in return. I told him about my work, the small victories and daily indignities, the supervisor who took credit for my work, and the security guard who always said good morning, the boardrooms I had memorized so well I could navigate them in the dark, the patterns of dust and wear that told stories about the people who used them. I told him about the photograph of my mother, how I had started looking at it again after years of keeping it hidden, how her face was starting to feel less like a ghost and more like a memory. We talked about books and movies and places we wanted to visit. He liked history and philosophy. I liked romance novels and cooking shows. He had travelled the world but never enjoyed it. I had never left the state but dreamed of seeing the ocean. We were different in almost every way, but somehow those differences felt like puzzle pieces clicking together. There was one dinner, about 6 weeks in, when he asked me about the photograph in my wallet. I had Mentioned it in the elevator, but we had never talked about it since. May I see it? He asked. I hesitated. That photograph was the most private thing I owned, more private than my scars or my stories. It was the only proof I had that my mother had existed, that I had been loved once, that there had been a time before the closets and the foster homes and the men who hurt me. But I pulled it out anyway, sliding it across the table toward him. He looked at it for a long time. My mother smiled up at him from the faded paper, young and beautiful, frozen in a moment before everything went wrong. "You have her eyes," he said finally. "Everyone says that." "They're right." He slid the photograph back to me, careful not to smudge it. "She looks kind." She was. My throat tightened. I don't remember much about her. Just feelings. The way she smelled. The sound of her voice when she sang to me at night. But I remember that she was kind. "That's where you get it from." I looked at him, startled. "Get what?" "Your kindness." He said it simply, like it was obvious. "The way you take care of people. The way you notice when someone is struggling and try to help without making them feel small. That's not something you can learn. It's something you're born with, or it's given to you by someone who loved you." I didn't know what to say. No one had ever called me kind before. Useful, yes. Efficient. Thorough. But not kind. Not like it was a gift. "Thank you," I said, and my voice cracked on the words. There was another dinner a few weeks later when the conversation turned to pain. Not mine this time, but his. He told me about a woman he had loved when he was younger, before he inherited the empire, before he became the man everyone feared. Her name was Catherine, he said. She was a lawyer, smart, beautiful, ambitious. She didn't know who my family was when we met. By the time she found out, she was already in too deep. "What happened?" She tried to stay. His voice was quiet. "She tried to make it work, but she couldn't live in my world. The violence, the secrets, the constant danger. It broke something in her. She started drinking, then pills. Then she was gone. She died? She left?" He shook his head. "Which felt like dying. She moved to Europe, changed her name. I haven't spoken to her in 15 years. Do you still love her?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I loved who she was before I destroyed her. I loved the woman who didn't know what I was capable of." He looked at me. "That's why I told you everything in the elevator. Because I needed you to know what you were getting into. I couldn't let you fall for a version of me that doesn't exist. The version I fell for is sitting right in front of me." He looked at me like I had said something impossible, like I had offered him something he didn't deserve. "You're not what I expected," he said. "Neither are you." Slowly, carefully, I began to believe that this was real. One night, about 2 months into our Thursday dinners, he took me somewhere different. Not a restaurant, but a small Italian bakery in a neighborhood I had never been to, run by an old woman named Rosa, who greeted Marcus with a kiss on both cheeks and called him by a name I didn't recognize. "My grandmother's friend," he explained as we sat at a tiny table in the back, eating cannoli that tasted like heaven. "She knew me before I was anyone, before the suits and the cars and the reputation. She still calls me by my childhood nickname." "What is it?" He smiled, almost shy. "Marco. My mother called me Marco." It was such a small thing, such a simple vulnerability, but it meant everything to me. He was showing me the person underneath the power, the boy who had existed before the empire. He was trusting me with something soft. "I like Marco," I said quietly. "I'd like to know him." "You already do." He reached across the table and took my hand. It was the first time. He had touched me deliberately, not to examine a bruise or help me stand, but just to touch, just to connect. "You're the only one who does." It took 6 months before I kissed him. We were on the balcony of his penthouse apartment, looking out at the city lights spread below us like a sea of stars. He was telling me about something that had gone wrong that day, some deal that had fallen through, some betrayal that had cut deeper than he wanted to admit. I wasn't really listening to the words. I was watching his face, the way his expressions changed when he spoke, the patience in his eyes that had first made me trust him. And I thought, I trust him. I actually trust him. This man who terrifies everyone else, this man who could destroy people with a phone call. I trust him with my life, with my heart, with every broken piece of myself that I've been protecting for so long. So I kissed him. He went still when my lips touched his, completely still, like he wasn't sure it was really happening, like he was afraid any movement might shatter the moment. Then his hands came up to cup my face, and he kissed me back, gentle, so gentle, like I was something precious, like I was something worth being careful with. "Are you sure?" he asked against my mouth. "I'm sure." I pulled back to look at him. I've been sure for months. I just needed time to believe it. He kissed me again. Deeper. His hands in my hair, my arms around his neck, the city spread out below us like a circuit board of lights. It wasn't about desire, although desire was there, burning low and steady. It was about finally letting someone past all my walls, about choosing to be seen instead of invisible. I moved in with him 3 months after that first kiss. Not the penthouse. That felt too big, too exposed, too much like stepping into a world I didn't belong in. Instead, he took me to a house upstate, surrounded by trees and silence and the kind of peace I had never known existed. The drive took almost 3 hours, winding through smaller and smaller towns until we were on a road that seemed to lead nowhere. I watched the trees thicken around us, watched the city fall away behind, and felt something in my chest loosen that I hadn't even known was tight. "It's been empty for years," he said as we walked through the rooms. The floors were worn hardwood, the windows let in the afternoon light, the fireplace looked like it hadn't been used in a decade. Dust motes floated in the sunlight like tiny stars. "I keep meaning to sell it, but I can never quite bring myself to." "Why not?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because it was my mother's, the only place she was ever happy." I walked through the house slowly, touching the walls, the windowsills, the banister of the stairs. Everything felt old and solid and real, like it had been waiting for someone to come back. The kitchen had a window that looked out over a garden that had gone wild, flowers and weeds tangled together in a riot of colour. The bedroom upstairs had a ceiling that sloped down toward the window, creating a little nook where you could sit and watch the trees. "She used to sit there," Marcus said, following my gaze, "for hours, just watching the birds." I looked around at the house that had held his mother's happiness. It felt like a place where someone could heal, where someone could become a different version of themselves, where the past could finally stop chasing you. "What if I lived here?" I said. He looked at me with something like hope. "Would you want to?" "I think I would." I walked to the window and looked out at the trees, the sky, the endless green stretching toward the horizon. "I think I could breathe here." The first few weeks were strange. I wasn't used to silence, wasn't used to space, wasn't used to being alone with my thoughts. In the city, there was always noise. Traffic, sirens, the constant hum of other people's lives pressing in on mine. Here there was nothing but wind and birdsong and the occasional creak of the old house settling into itself. I had to learn how to exist without being needed. That was the hardest part. My whole life had been built around usefulness, around making myself indispensable so people wouldn't throw me away. But here, in this quiet house in the woods, there was no one to clean up after, no messes to organize, no needs to anticipate. There was just me. Just the task of figuring out who I was when I wasn't serving someone else. I started small. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, not because Marcus asked, but because I needed something to do with my hands. I fixed the garden, pulling weeds and planting flowers I had researched online. I learned the names of the birds that visited the feeder outside the kitchen window. Cardinals, blue jays, finches, a pair of mourning doves that came every morning at sunrise. And slowly, I started to want things again. I enrolled in nursing school the following month. I drove to classes 3 days a week in a car Marcus had bought me, though I had protested that I didn't need one. I made friends with the neighbours, an elderly couple named Ruth and Harold, who had lived on the road for 40 years and remembered when these woods were full of deer. I learned to cook badly at first and then better, and I fed Marcus elaborate meals when he came home on weekends, watching his face to see if he liked them. He liked them. He liked everything I did, not because he was pretending, but because he was learning to see me the way I was learning to see myself. Not as damaged, not as broken, not as someone who had merely survived, but as someone who was building a life, one piece at a time, from the ruins of what came before. Then, 14 months after the night in the elevator, the threat came. I was in the kitchen making dinner when Marcus called. His voice was tight in a way I had never heard before, controlled in a way that meant he was anything but. "Elena, I need you to listen carefully." I set down the knife I had been using. "What's wrong?" "There's a situation. Someone in my organization has been selling information, names, addresses, details about people under my protection." He paused. "Your name is on a list." The cold that washed through me was familiar. The same cold I had felt when Derek found me. The same cold I had spent my whole life running from. "What does that mean?" "It means someone may be coming for you. Not Derek. He's long gone. Someone else. Someone who wants to hurt me by hurting the people I care about." His voice softened. "I'm sending people to the house. They'll be there within the hour. Don't open the door for anyone else. Don't answer the phone unless it's me. Can you do that?" "Yes." My voice was steady. I had trained myself out of panic years ago. "Yes, I can do that." "Elena," he paused, "I won't let anything happen to you. Do you understand? I will burn down everything I've built before I let anyone touch you." I know. I did know. I had known it since the elevator, since the sidewalk, since the first time he had looked at me like I was worth protecting. "I'll be careful. Just come home. I'm already on my way." The hour that followed was the longest of my life. I sat in the living room with the knife from the kitchen in my hand, watching the windows, listening for sounds that didn't belong. The house was silent except for the wind in the trees and my own breathing. I thought about all the years I had spent being invisible, hiding, running from threats I couldn't fight. And I thought about how tired I was of running. Every creak of the old house made me tense. Every rustle of wind through the trees sounded like footsteps. I counted the minutes, watching the clock on the wall tick forward with agonizing slowness. 45 minutes. 50. 55. I thought about what I would do if someone came through the door. The knife in my hand was sharp. I had sharpened it myself just last week because that's what you do when you've spent your whole life being careful. But I wasn't sure I could use it. I had never hurt anyone before. I had only ever been hurt. But I thought about Marcus, about the life we were building, about the woman I was becoming, the one who stood beside him instead of behind him. And I realized that if someone tried to take that away from me, I would fight. Not because I wanted to hurt anyone, but because I had finally found something worth protecting. When the car pulled up to the house, I didn't relax until I saw Marcus step out. He crossed the yard in quick strides and came through the door, like a man who had been holding his breath for hours. When he saw me standing there, unharmed, the tension drained from his face. "You're safe," he said. "I'm safe." I set down the knife. "What happened?" he told me. One of his lieutenants, a man named Caruso, who had worked for the family for decades, had been selling information to a rival organization, names of people under Marcus's protection, addresses, vulnerabilities. The list had included business associates, their families, and me. "Caruso is being dealt with," Marcus said. The way he said it made it clear I shouldn't ask for details. "The people who bought the information have been warned. Anyone who comes near you will answer to me." And if they don't care about your warnings, then they'll care about the consequences. He took my hands in his grip tight, almost desperate. I meant what I said, Elena. I will protect you. Whatever it takes. Whatever it costs. I looked at him, this dangerous man who had listened to my stories in a broken elevator, who had made my nightmare disappear with words and presence, who had given me a house and a future and a reason to stop running. And I felt something shift in my chest. I'm tired of being protected, I said quietly. His expression flickered. What do you mean? I mean I've spent my whole life being the person who needs saving, the victim, the survivor, the woman who can't fight her own battles. I squeezed his hands. I want to be something else. I want to be your partner, not your project. I want to stand beside you, not behind you. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What would that look like?" "I don't know yet." I smiled and it felt real, felt like something that belonged on my face. But I want to figure it out. Together. The crisis passed. Caruso disappeared and the rival organization backed off, and the house upstate returned to its peaceful silence. But something had changed between us. Some wall had come down, some distance had closed. We were no longer protector and protected. We were partners. I finished nursing school. I graduated with honors, and Marcus was there in the front row, looking at me like I had done something miraculous when all I had done was survive, the same way I had always survived by being thorough and careful and refusing to give up. I got a job at a clinic 20 minutes from the house. The patients were people who reminded me of who I used to be. Women escaping violence, families struggling to survive, people who had been invisible so long they had forgotten they existed. I told them my story sometimes, when they needed to hear that there was something on the other side. That survival wasn't the end, that someone might be waiting in an elevator, ready to listen to everything they had to say. We got married 2 years after the night in the elevator. A small ceremony, just a few people we trusted. His sister, who had flown in from London and looked at me with suspicion until she realized I wasn't going anywhere. Paul, the driver who had become a friend. Ruth and Harold, the elderly neighbours, who cried happy tears and brought homemade jam as a gift. I wore a simple white dress. He wore a suit that wasn't as expensive as the ones he wore in the city, we said. Vows we had written ourselves, promises that only we understood. The ceremony was in the garden I had brought back to life, surrounded by the flowers I had planted and the birds I had learned to name. Marcus cried when he saw me walking toward him through the wildflowers. I had never seen him cry before, not once in all the months we had known each other. But there were tears on his cheeks as I took his hands and promised to love him for the rest of my life. "I never thought I would have this," he whispered during the ceremony, so quietly that only I could hear. "I never thought I deserved it." "Neither did I whispered back. "But here we are." After the ceremony, we had dinner in the house. Nothing fancy, just pasta and bread and wine that Paul had brought from the city. Ruth taught me her secret recipe for tiramisu, and I made it for dessert, and everyone told me it was the best they'd ever had. I don't know if they were telling the truth or just being kind, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that I was surrounded by people who knew my story, who knew what I had survived, and who loved me anyway. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Marcus and I sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. The sky was clearer here than it had ever been in the city, a vast expanse of darkness punctuated by pinpricks of light. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking about the elevator," I said. "About how scared I was. About how I almost didn't say anything." "But you did." "But I did." I leaned into him, feeling his arm wrap around my shoulders. And now I'm here, married to a man I love, in a house that feels like home, with a future I never thought I would have. Any regrets? I thought about it. The years of pain, the scars on my body and my heart, the long road that had led me to this moment. And I shook my head. Not one, I said. Not a single one. I became Elena Volkov that day. I took his name because I wanted to leave the old one behind, wanted to step out of the skin I had worn for so long and become someone new. The woman who had survived was becoming the woman who lived. The woman who had told her secrets to a stranger in a broken elevator was becoming the woman who woke up every morning without fear. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, certain that someone is coming for me. The nightmares haven't stopped entirely. I don't think they ever will. But when I wake up now, Marcus is there. He doesn't ask questions. He doesn't try to fix it. He just pulls me close and holds me until my breathing steadies, until the fear fades back into memory, until I remember that I'm safe, that I'm home, that I'm loved. I've learned that healing isn't linear. Some days I feel strong, invincible, like nothing could ever hurt me again. Other days the old fears creep back, whispering that this is all temporary, that happiness is just another thing that will be taken away. On those days, I remind myself of everything I've survived. I remind myself that I'm not the same woman who hid in closets and flinched at raised hands. I'm someone new, someone who chose to be seen instead of invisible. It's been 5 years now. 5 years since the storm. 5 years since the red emergency light and the hours of confession and the moment when everything changed. I still work at the clinic. I still tell my story to women who need to hear it. But I've also started doing other things. Things I never imagined I would have the courage to do. I speak at shelters sometimes, telling rooms full of scared women that there is something on the other side of survival. I've started writing my story down, page by page, not because I think anyone will read it, but because putting it into words makes it feel real, makes it feel like something that happened to me, rather than something that defined me. Marcus supports all of it. He reads every page I write, even the ones that make him angry on my behalf. He drives me to the shelters when I'm too nervous to drive myself. He sits in the back of rooms and watches me speak, and afterward he tells me he's proud of me. Not because of what I survived, but because of what I'm doing with it. I still think about that night sometimes. How close I came to hiding my pain, to turning away, to staying invisible the way I had been invisible my whole life. But I was too broken that night, too exhausted for pretense. And somehow, in that exhaustion, I found the courage to let someone see me completely. By morning, he knew everything. That was what he had promised, what had seemed so impossible in the moment. But it was true. By the time the sun rose and the power returned and the elevator began to move again, Marcus Volkov knew every wound I carried, every scar I had hidden, every truth I had never spoken aloud. He knew me better than anyone had ever known me. And instead of using that knowledge to hurt me, he used it to heal me. That's the thing about being invisible. It protects you, but it isolates you. It keeps you safe, but it keeps you alone. I spent so many years perfecting my invisibility, learning to move through the world without being noticed, without being seen, without being touched. I thought it was strength. I thought it was survival. But it was just a different kind of cage. Marcus found me in that cage, and he didn't try to break me out. He just showed me that the door was open, that I could leave whenever I was ready, that there was something on the other side worth walking toward. I walked toward it. Slowly at first, then faster. I'm still walking toward it now, every day, with every choice I make. The woman who polished the underside of conference tables is gone. The woman who flinched when strangers raised their hands is gone. The woman who calculated escape routes and memorized bus schedules and kept a knife in her kitchen and fear in her heart is gone. In her place is someone else. Someone who looks in the mirror and sees strength instead of damage. Someone who opens doors instead of locking them. Someone who lets herself be loved fully and completely without waiting for the other shoe to drop. Marcus comes home every night now. Every single night. He walks through the door of the house that was his mother's. the house that became our home, and he finds me in the kitchen or the garden or the living room where the fireplace finally works again. He looks at me with an expression I understand now. Not disbelief, but wonder. The same wonder I feel when I look at him. The wonder of two people who found each other in the most unlikely of places and chose each other anyway. We sit on the porch some evenings, watching the sun set over the trees, the sky painted in oranges and purples that seem too beautiful to be real. The same porch where we sat on our wedding night, looking at the stars. The same porch where I learned what it felt like to be at peace. We talk about our days, our patience and problems and small victories. We talk about the future, maybe a dog, maybe a child, maybe just more years of this quiet peace that neither of us ever thought we would have. We talk about the past sometimes too, but it doesn't hurt the way it used to. The wounds have scarred over. They're part of us now, but they don't define us. Last month, I finally finished writing my story. Every page from the closet, under the stairs, to the elevator, to this house in the woods. Marcus read it in one sitting, and when he finished, he didn't say anything. He just pulled me into his arms and held me for a long time. "You should publish it," he said finally. "Maybe someday," I said. "Right now, it's enough just to have written it." Ruth and Harold come over for dinner on Sundays. Paul visits when he's not working, and he always brings wine that costs too much and stories that make Marcus laugh. His sister calls from London once a month, and longer sounds suspicious when she asks about me. She sounds grateful. She told me once that she had never seen her brother happy before, not really, not in a way that reached his eyes. She thanked me for giving him that. I told her I hadn't given him anything. We had given it to each other. The power went out during the storm. I was trapped in an elevator with a man I didn't know. And by morning he knew everything. Every truth I had buried, every secret I had kept, every broken piece of myself I had hidden from the world. He knew me completely. And he chose to stay anyway. That's all love is, in the end. Being known, being seen, and being chosen anyway, over and over again, every day for the rest of your life. I think about the woman I was before the elevator, the one who polished the underside of conference tables and flinched at sudden movements and never let anyone see her cry. She seems like a stranger now, someone I knew a long time ago, someone I've grown past, but I carry her with me anyway. I carry her strength, her resilience, her stubborn refusal to give up. I just don't carry her fear anymore. Marcus asked me once if I regretted telling him everything that night. If I wished I had kept my walls up, stayed invisible, protected myself the way I always had. I told him no. I told him that the night in the elevator was the bravest thing I ever did. Not because I wasn't afraid, I was terrified, but because I chose to trust anyway. I chose to be seen anyway. I chose to reach for something better, even though every experience in my life had taught me that reaching for things only got me hurt. And he was there, waiting, ready to catch me. I was known. I was seen. I was chosen. And I will never be invisible again.